Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. This week's religious trauma topic is religions and emotional manipulation. We're going to deal with 3 of the biggest emotional manipulation tactics that churches, religious organizations in general tend to use, and why they use them. As always, I'm going to ask you first to make sure that you have subscribed, make sure that you leave a comment, and that you like the video if you liked it. Also, don't forget to share and to hit the bell, just so that you get notified every time I publish. Thank you so much. Religions cannot exist without people being emotionally involved. There would be no purpose to subscribing to a set of beliefs and aligning your life in that way if there were not emotions attached. Because in reality, most religions have rules that people don't really always like to follow. Why would you follow a religion with not fun rules if you weren't emotionally connected to the result? I already know, because I've gotten some of this backlash on other videos of mine, that I'm going to have people who are going to either in the comments or in private messages say, not all Christians are like this, not all religions are like this. And I get what you're saying, and I understand what you're trying to do. But in case you haven't been paying attention for the last year and a half, not all fill in the blank is not an excuse for it happening with such frequency, that there are so many people out there who are damaged by it. Okay? First, we're going to start with gaslighting. I've talked about gaslighting before. I will go ahead and link that video if you'd like to see it. Gaslighting, just to remind you, is a form of emotional manipulation where someone attempts to use someone else's weaknesses or insecurities or things that they're not sure about to convince them that they are wrong, or that they are misled, or that they are not entirely sane, usually so that the perpetrator gets what they want. Narcissists use gaslighting a lot, and that's sort of the way it's used in the religious community also. The major gaslighting that happens, typically religious community-wise, is when it comes to blame. You will find people, especially in the Christian community, who are going to blame their bad behaviors on something external, whether it is,
well, my human side is just weak, and so I gave in to my flesh.
Maybe they're saying,
humans have a sinful nature and I fight against it as much as I can, but sometimes I just give in to that nature.
Or some people just blame it on Satan.
Satan tempted me.
Or
the devil made me do it.
People will say all sorts of things in order to take the blame for their bad behavior off of them. In some ways, there's some psychological value to that. If you can take the blame or the bad stuff that somebody has and move it outside of them so that they can evaluate it appropriately, it does help people to figure things out. But to constantly use something outside of yourself to blame for the ways that you have behaved badly, that just is you refusing to take responsibility for your own actions. You don't have to be tempted by something outside of your body to do something that felt good to you, even if it didn't feel good for other people. The gaslighting happens on things that people do well also. If someone exhibits a gift for something, if someone exhibits strength in a certain area, they call it a God-given talent. God has blessed you with the ability to speak, and that's why your sermon is so good. God has blessed you with this, and God has seen that you are going to do well in this area. And it's never about anything to do with the person. You're always supposed to push that credit off towards God and that blame off towards Satan, and nothing, no ownership, no positive or negative ever comes out of us. I've always found that really difficult for me as a human, because why am I worshiping a God that sees nothing redeemable in me except for what they created in me? Emotional manipulation number 2 is fear tactics. This is in some ways connected to gaslighting, but specifically there are fears that humans have that religions play on in order to get what they want. One of the most common ways of doing that is the fear of being on the outside. If you are not using all of the gifts that God has given you, and if you are not giving all of your time and energy and emotion to the ministry, then you are not living fully into who God wants you to be. That's the words that people use. If you choose to do something that's not fully living into the way God wants you to be, you will be cut off. The example I see all of the time is people who are leading things like worship in a church organization, and they are doing things outside of what the church considers appropriate for that person. So for instance, I know a worship leader who was living with their significant other who was removed from leadership because they couldn't put that person up on a stage and have them lead the music if they were living a sinful lifestyle. Same goes for those in the LGBTQIA plus community. The egregious phrase that's used is
hate the sinner, love the sinner. And so as a queer person, you can come into our community and you can be with us and fellowship with us and do all the things with us.
But you can't be in leadership because you are choosing to live in a way that is not in accordance with what the Christian faith believes.
Now, if you change that, if you fix that, if you do the things that I think you should be doing in the first place,
then you will have my approval and then you can be in front of people and lead. But if you don't, then that's okay, but it's really your choice.
That's not a choice. You are asking someone to choose between being accepted and being refused, and then manipulating them into believing that it's their choice. So even if they do end up walking away and saying, I am not going to say goodbye to this thing in my life, I am going to find a community that will accept me, those in the religious organizations say,
well, it's such a shame. That person is so lost. We wanted to love them, but they chose to walk away.
They didn't choose that. You chose it for them, but you feel like you don't have to be responsible for that because you gave them a choice. They didn't have a real choice. A real choice is you can do this or you can do this, and your results are the same. That's what an all-loving community would do. This next one is emotional manipulation of children especially, but it's the fear of hell. Intrinsically, most humans have a fear of eternity. The idea of something that stretches out forever and never change is completely the opposite to what we experience in life. Life is always changing. Life is always evolving, and it looks different, and we feel different, and we experience things differently. And then stasis. So stasis is scary. The idea that stasis would also be pain is not something that computes in the brains of most people who follow this idea of religion. So we've got this image that we sell to children of
a human body burning in hell or in a lake of fire or, devils and pitchforks or whatever for the rest of time. And
I grew up in the church, as many of you know, and as I got older, it started to be sold to me as this. It's not actually like sulfur and fire and, demons and pitchforks, but it is eternal separation from God. What that means is that if I do not live up to these rules that these other humans are telling me need to be followed, I would be punished because I didn't agree with them. Because I cannot tell you the number of times growing up in the church and having a really authentic belief in God, how little my God that I knew and that I loved and I knew loved me resembled the God that the people in the church were selling me. The God that would cast me out for doing something wrong, or that would test me all of the time because my faith wasn't strong enough. So God was trying to make it stronger. That God did not resemble what I knew a creator to be able to be. And it never sat right, but that fear tactic that I was wrong and my human nature was clouding my judgment, that fear sat in me for so long. And it sits in children all around the world, and it sits in adults now who were never able to deconstruct that idea of punishment from the idea of doing good. And so what you get is people who are doing good or doing what you want them to do because they're afraid of the consequences, not because they are internally motivated to do good. But it looks the same on the outside, looks great on the outside, so we go with it. This last one in this fear umbrella is very similar to the first two with a little bit of a nuance. It's the fear of disappointing. If you are someone who has been put into a leadership position in a religious organization, the pressure is so much higher for you to do good and be good and never get led astray, because if you go astray, then everyone else who's following goes astray. The responsibilities are tremendous. And we put those responsibilities on children and on teenagers and on young adults who don't even understand what that responsibility would mean in general, because they're still trying to figure out how they feel about this whole religion thing in the first place. So we put this responsibility on people to get people saved and to lead people in the way that they're supposed to. You might see as a teenager, you might have seen people being removed from leadership positions because they were queer, or because they were doing drugs on the weekend, or because, I don't know, their social media content had the F word in it. Seen that one too. So you live in this fear of doing something wrong. In human nature, we are going to do things that are against our social contract with other people, and we're going to do things that are within our social contract. Neither is inherently good or bad. But in reality, when you're in this kind of an umbrella, the fear is that this stuff that's against our social contract is in fact bad then, which makes us bad. Because despite what anyone will say, there is actually no separation in most religious communities between actions and worth. Okay, this next one is more specific to youth ministries and retreat ministries and camping. There's this idea that when you have a multiple overnight something away from home, there's a cry night. And on cry night is when you have the altar call, and it's when everybody ends up crying and hugging and being so emotional. You get this emotional high. It's usually at the end of whatever experience it is you're having. Here's why it happens. Because people are sleep deprived. They feel closer, fake closer to the people that they're there with because they spent so much time with them, so much more time than they usually spend with other people, but they feel closer and they don't realize it's fake closeness. So they feel really intensely about the people around them and about the things going on, and all week or all weekend or for the whole time they're away, everyone in charge sort of pointing them at,
do you feel good right now? That's God.
Do you feel happy right now? That's God.
God has given us all these things. Look around us. Look at the beautiful campus we're on. God has given us all of this.
all of those words, and the point of all of it is to push people towards this night where they are going to give themselves over to God and to be saved and to be with him in glory forever. In the secular world, if someone had that amount of sleep deprivation or emotional manipulation, they would not be considered able to enter into a contract because they were not of sound mind. And somehow we still think it's okay in a religious setting to ask young people to make a forever commitment to God based on the word of the people around them when they are sleep deprived and emotionally fragile. What are we doing? Religious trauma mimics the results of living with or being close to someone who is narcissistic. Understand, religion does not have to be inherently traumatic. But when you use religion in order to have your way done, or your idea moved forward, or your legacy told, you are harming people. I can't tell you the number of times I've known people in ministry that say their motivation for doing ministry is to enlarge the kingdom, but also to be actively responding to the call God put in their life, which means that the things they do in ministry and in leadership, the people they lead, are really just propping up the leader. Because in the end, when that's your reason, it's really about you. But that's another part of the emotional manipulation, right? Is that you're supposed to sacrifice you. And you're supposed to have no boundaries and no...
Your job is 24/7, 365, and then some.
You have to give all that you have and then give more because God gave you this life and this calling and this idea that you could be great in his eyes if you just do these things.
That makes the people around you a means to that end. And it's no longer about them. And when it's not about them, but it's about the call on your life, or it's about the things that you are doing to affirm yourself, then you are using the people you are leading. And then who are you? The reason for this video is because I want to call these things out. The other side of that is I know a lot of you watching this have already identified these things in your life and have understood them to be detrimental to your life now. In some ways, you probably are resistant to authority or suspicious of people who attribute their acts or their gifts to anything other than themselves. You are likely overly reliant on your own knowledge and distrustful of other people in general when they tell you something that does not ring true for you, because that has been so manipulated for you for so many years. It's likely you don't trust yourself now, or that you don't trust the idea that there could be anything bigger outside of you, because everything that everyone told you was bigger and outside of you actually came back to them. Bottom lining it here for you, that was not your fault. You do get to trust yourself. You do get to take ownership of your own actions. And you do get to make mistakes and also make good decisions and not have it take away from who you are. The people who convinced you otherwise were wrong. But understanding the ways that you have been emotionally manipulated to believe certain things gives you the freedom to discover what it is you really believe and leave the rest behind, because it's not yours to carry anymore. It's not your fault and it's not your responsibility. And you're allowed to let it go. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. Can't wait to talk to you next week. Keep your comments and your suggestions coming. I love hearing them. I love hearing from you. And until I talk to you again, have a great week. Take care of yourselves and each other.